Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's International Fight Week. The time where the UFC organization goes that extra step to be more than just a company presenting half-naked men fighting in a cage for 15 to 25 minutes, as they now annually honor the sport of MMA through the prestigious UFC Hall of Fame induction ceremony, which is honestly great to see, and then also some random interactive 2-day fan experience called UFC X. And that's really to be honest. But most importantly at this time, we as the MMA fans put more pressure on the UFC to have the International Fight Week pay-per-view card to be one of, if not the best card of the year. And let's be honest, we are just using this week that the UFC is randomly pushing to be some tradition to get a banging fight card, realistically. Which, thankfully, the UFC have delivered some absolute bloody heaters for us in the past year, but also some absolute stinkers that could barely pass as pay-per-view cards. So I don't think there's a better time than being in International Fight Week to rank every single International Fight Week card, starting from the first one, UFC 148, the first International Fight Week pay-per-view in 2012, and finishing at UFC 317 that's happening this weekend to rank all 13 cards. Now, you might be saying, but Callum, UFC 317 has not happened yet, depending on when you're watching this, so why are you ranking it now? You must be bloody stupid. Well, most of the time I am. But to clear things up, if you are watching it before 317, I'm using this as a bit of a prediction for that card to where I think it will place in all of the International Fight Week cards. However, I will be giving my thoughts on where the card will actually place in the UFC 317 recap video that I am going to be releasing straight after the event takes place. So stay tuned for that one. But if you are watching this after UFC 317, you either get to say, oh, actually, might have been accurate, or you get to laugh at me for my dog shit prediction. But either way, I do hope you enjoy it. Now, looking at the tiers, we have got Take My Money, which is obvious, just take my damn money. This card is absolutely bloody fantastic. It was definitely rightfully in the International Fight Week slot. Then we've got Great Card. So it's not the best of the best, but still a great card. Better than just another pay-per-view, which is exactly what our next tier is. I mean, because the MMA community expects an International Fight Week card as a pay-per-view to be on crack. So I'll be ranking them pretty harshly when I'm comparing them to each other. And then lastly is a nice 6-hour pee break. Barely deserves to be a pay-per-view. They did a very poor job overall compared to what it should be for what an International Fight Week card is expected of. And now getting into the tier list, we're starting off with 2012 UFC 148, Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva 2. This is when Anderson Silva was at his absolute bloody prime, and Chael Sonnen was coming into the rematch after he almost beat Anderson Silva in that first fight, beat him pretty much 4 rounds to zip until he got triangle choked. And in this one, he had the funny moment of getting that random ass spinning back fist, completely throwing himself off balance. Anderson Silva just pumps him in the solar plexus and takes him out. So there was a pretty eventful main event. Then we also had Forrest Griffin retiring against Tito Ortiz. He beat him in that fight. We had Damian Maia KOing Stun Gun in 47 seconds, which Stun Gun did fuck up his rib in that fight. So it wasn't exactly a KO, but we had some other decent ones on there. We had Chad Mendes, who KO'd Cody McKenzie in 31 seconds with a body shot. And then down the card, we also had Khabib versus Gleison Tibau, which is definitely a controversial fight, and Tibau arguably honestly won that fight. Definitely arguable there, but as a card as a whole, that's really everything I can really think of that was of note in that card. 925,000 pay-per-view buys thereabouts, so it was pretty decent for that time period. I mean, this made it the highest selling UFC event of 2012, but there was only 3 out of 11 finishes. Only 3 finishes out of those 11 fights, and it did face some hits. And what I will say is with pretty much most of these events, the International Fight Week events, they're kind of cursed when it comes to their injury records, because in this one, in 2012, UFC 148, we had Dominic Cruz tearing his ACL. He was supposed to fight Uriah Faber, and then Uriah Faber was supposed to fight Renan Barão on this card, but it got moved from UFC 148 to 149. So there was a bit of hindrance there. And honestly, I just think with that low amount of finishes and only a couple of decent fights on the card. I mean, the main event was good, but especially even with the main event, in contrast to their first fight between Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen, I gotta say that this is just another pay-per-view, to be honest. I just don't really see how it's going to be getting much higher in comparison to the other cards we've got on here. Now, moving on to 2013, UFC 162. This is where Anderson Silva's run completely came to an end because we had Chris Weidman KOing Silva in their first fight. This was their first one, not their second one. Chris Weidman ended that 17-fight win streak, so extremely memorable main event there. Then we had Frankie Edgar pretty much dominate Charles Oliveira, and we had Cub Swanson as well. He ground and pound KO'd Dennis Siver pretty nicely. And then we did have some other ones on there. We had Gabriel Gonzaga. He KO'd Herman in 17 seconds, pretty deadly as well. And Edson Barboza got a nice leg kick TKO against Rafael Oliveira, which, yeah, there's some notable pretty just finishes on there, to be honest. I will say that it wasn't like the best when it came to pay-per-view buys. It was about 550,000, and if you're going with Silva and Sonnen, which was around 925,000, almost doubling it, and I mean, this is a year later, you really should just be escalating higher and higher. So pay-per-view buys was not great. It was projected to be higher. Numbers fell short. And it did have 6 out of 11 finishes. So it was over 50% for the finish rate. So I do think overall, especially with the impact of Chris Weidman taking out Anderson Silva, I've got to say, I think this was a great card. I do think it was a great card. Just a bit higher, I do think, than UFC 148, just in terms of memorable moments for the card. Now, 2014, UFC 175. We're not getting rid of Chris Weidman because we got him versus Lyoto Machida. Now, this one, UFC 175, honestly, I think without Ronda Rousey getting this 16-second title defense against Alexis Davis, which I think was her best performance of her entire career, to be honest. Aside from that, I think this card seriously lacked, because Chris Weidman versus Lyoto Machida, it was a pretty low output fight. Not a lot happened there. I mean, we had Uriah Faber submit Alex Caceres with a rear naked choke. We had Rob Font, who was quite young at the time, KO George Roop. But yeah, aside from that, that's really all the notable names we've got. It did between like 500,000 to 550,000 pay-per-view buys, which for that year was actually very good. It was the highest selling event of the year. It even actually beat out Canelo versus Bivol that year for pay-per-views. But 3 out of 10 finishes on that card, and we had Chael Sonnen, who could not fight on the card because he failed a drug test. Then we had Wanderlei Silva, who skipped a bloody medical. And then we even had Daniel Cormier's fight get kicked off as well, who he was supposed to fight Rafael Cavalcanti, which he isn't a big name, but Daniel Cormier obviously is. So it was a pretty doomed International Fight Week card. Low finishes, boring main event, not much happening, to be honest, and a lot of cancellations. Honestly, this is a 6-hour pee break. Honestly, for what an International Fight Week should be, I do not rate it here, to be honest. But moving from that to 2015, we have got UFC 189. The whole entire main card had finishes. It started slow on the card. It did have decision, pretty much like all decisions, then all finishes. So it really came to life when it came to that main card, and that's where it's most important because people are paying for it. And when it came to that main card, I mean, absolutely fantastic. We had McGregor beating Chad Mendes against the cage. We had their live performances as well, which was, you know, really extra. We had like all like the screens on the octagon, the smoke everywhere. It was pretty memorable in that sense. And then co-main event, Robbie Lawler versus bloody Rory MacDonald. I mean, do we really need to say much about that event? Absolutely insane. Just blood everywhere. Changed their careers forever. Honestly, it was an incredible fight as a co-main event. 2 title fights as well. And then we had Jeremy Stevens KOing Dennis Bermudez by a flying knee. So he just completely cut off Bermudez's hype, because Bermudez back then, in that time, he was on a win streak. He was doing very, very well then. Stevens just completely put a stop to his win streak there. So definitely some memorable moments there, 100%. We also had some lower ones, which were still finishes. We had Gunnar Nelson submitting Brandon Thatch, and we had, I believe it was Thomas Almeida. He got a flying knee KO against Brad Pickett, and Brad Pickett had a chin on him. So very successful main card overall. Feature prelim, we had Matt Brown. Matt Brown, obviously the immortal. He's just a classic, fighting Tim Means, guillotined him in the first round. I mean, honestly, this was a very good card. There's not much I can argue here. 6 out of 11 finishes, over a 50% finish rate. I mean, we were supposed to have McGregor versus Aldo on this card, but I mean, the McGregor versus Mendes was completely fine as it was, because it was an interim title fight, had the performances and everything. Honestly, I think it was extremely successful. Not a lot of people backing out of the cards or fights fizzling or anything like that. Good finishes, great main card. Take my money. Absolutely incredible card there. Now, UFC 200 2016. This one is definitely an interesting take, because we had Amanda Nunes against Miesha Tate as the main event. Now, Nunes, she looked absolutely dominant in this fight, actually won the belt here, and she's the greatest female fighter of all time, so definitely memorable there. But then we had Brock Lesnar fight Mark Hunt. He beat Mark Hunt by a decision, but it was a no contest overall because bloody PEDs, Brock Lesnar, PEDs, overturned his win. And then we had Daniel Cormier versus Anderson Silva. Banging fight. I mean, DC 30-26 to Anderson Silva. But this was supposed to be DC versus John Jones for UFC 200. That just would have been absolutely insane. It was just a really bad loss losing Jones. And then, I mean, we did also have Jose Aldo against Frankie Edgar. I mean, Aldo kind of returned from that Conor McGregor loss, but then he ended up fighting Max Holloway, and we know what happened there. But then aside from that as well, we had Cain Velasquez. He TKO'd Travis Brown, just destroyed Travis Brown. And the prelims as well had good names on it. We had Johnny Hendricks, Kelvin Gastelum, TJ Dillashaw, Rafael Assunção, Sage Northcutt as well, back when he was like a big thing. But none of those fights were finishes. Like, all of those in those prelim area. The prelims themselves were honestly just shit, but the early prelims were really good, because we had Joe Lozon TKO Diego Sanchez, we had Gegard Mousasi KO Thiago Santos, and we had Jim Miller ground and pound TKO Takanori Gomi, like, brutally as well to kick off that card. So honestly, I think it's just got a bit of like a hallmark tax on it, because it just, honestly, it didn't do that fantastically well for being the UFC 200 card as a hallmark event. And it didn't even beat out UFC 100 when it came to pay-per-view sales. It did 1 million pay-per-view buys, which is great, but didn't outdo UFC 100, which, like, literally translating with inflation as well, makes it even more depressing for that card and its success. And I'm not like super against women's fights and everything like that, but having that as the main event of this bloody card, are you kidding me? Just stupid, honestly. And like, you should have made DC versus Anderson Silva that main event. Just, I don't know, shift something somehow. But honestly, that would have made it more memorable. And 5 out of 12 finishes, so didn't get that 50% rate. It was like at the very top of the card, it was somewhat decent. At the bottom, very bottom of the card, the early prelims were fantastic. The prelims were pretty dog shit. So yeah, I mean, we were supposed to have McGregor and Diaz on this card. I mean, we were also supposed to have John Jones as well. I mean, you know, John Jones, we know what happens with him. God, all the cancellations with him. And McGregor had a contract dispute, so it just wasn't really destined to be the greatest. And I mean, this is a hot take, but honestly, I'm gonna have to say that this is just another pay-per-view. It was better than UFC 148, I will say that, but yeah, in comparison to even some of the other ones we have on this list, and it being UFC 200, seriously, it just did fall short. Now, looking at 2017, we have got UFC 213, which was Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero. This was the interim title fight for the middleweight division, which, first of all, I will say this was the weaker of their two fights. Their second fight, their rematch, was much better. I think that was UFC 225, I believe. and that one was just a lot better, to be honest. But on this card, we did have Alistair Overeem versus Verdum, which nothing really happened in this fight. Like, there wasn't really much to go off, to be honest. It was pretty lackluster. Then we had Anthony Pettis. He did outclass Jim Miller, to be fair. He was pretty dominant in that fight. Then we had Rob Font get a guillotine choke, which we don't really see from him, against Douglas Silva de Andrade to start off the main card. So there were some pretty decent fights on the main card, to be honest. There were some decent ones. I won't say they were fantastic, but we had some decent KOs on the prelims. We had Chad Laprise, who was coming through the Ultimate Fighter back in the day. He KO'd Chris Camozzi, and he was looking very good. Definitely a talent at that time. And then we had Santos versus Meerschaert. Santos KO'd Meerschaert there. Looked very impressive, but realistically, I don't think it was that great, to be honest. And the pay-per-views just align with that. It was disappointing pay-per-view numbers, to be honest. It went from like 125,000 to 150,000 pay-per-view buys, which was incredibly weak. That is extremely weak. One of the lowest selling pay-per-views of the year. And 5 out of 11 finishes, so still under that 50% as well. This card, like, honestly got hit so hard because it lost Michael Bisping versus GSP. It lost Robbie Lawler versus Donald Cerrone because Cerrone got some kind of blood infection. And then it lost Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw because Garbrandt got his back blown out or something. And then it lost the main event that was supposed to happen, which would have been a good one, even though I shat on it literally at 200. But it was supposed to be Valentina Shevchenko versus Amanda Nunes, but Nunes pulled out 6. So this card, it kind of just did get railed a bit, to be honest. I think overall it wasn't like the absolute worst, but I've got to say, in comparison to an International Fight Week, I'm going to put it at the top of 6-hour P break. I just think that there was a lot that got missed out on that card, and it just wasn't up to International Fight Week scratch, to say the least. Now, moving to 2018, we had UFC 226, which was Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier, which Daniel Cormier became the double champion. Super, super memorable there, which is great, but that definitely carries this card a fair bit because we lost the co-main event of Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega because Holloway had to pull out because he had like a concussion. And then we had Ngannou versus Derek Lewis, which absolutely sucked ass. That, honestly, on paper, this card looked absolutely cracked, but it really just didn't pan out that well because we had Paul Felder versus Mike Perry, which not much really happened in that fight either. It was pretty low output. And then we had Anthony Pettis. He submitted Michael Chiesa, which was decent. We had Khalil Roundtree, KO Saki, which helped the co-main event out a little bit. But, I mean, aside from that, I think the main card wasn't fantastic, but we did have Paulo Costa absolutely bully Uriah Hall. We had Dan Hooker KO Gilbert Burns as well, which is a bit of a kind of lost, forgotten, extremely underrated fight. But I will say that, honestly, overall, I think it was quite a fun card when I watched it, to be honest. But, yeah, I don't think it's like the best of the best or anything like that. I think that, I mean, you look at the pay-per-views as well, 380,000 pay-per-view buys. It was 120,000 pay-per-view projections short. So, and that's with a double champ opportunity. They were looking at 500,000 pay-per-views, which for 2018 is not great. They were looking for that, and it still didn't hit that with double champ status. I mean, it had a very disappointing co-main event. There was a lack of interest overall for the main event, to be honest, just because of it just was very slow, and there's just a lot of crap going around with John Jones and everything at that time. And yeah, it just wasn't the fight that people wanted to see more so. And I think that that's where it really did get hindered. But I think it was a pretty good card. Like, I want to put it here in just another pay-per-view, but honestly, DC becoming double champ and seeing at this point in time how hard that is to do, I'm going to put him at the bottom of great card, because I do think with things like that, like with Paulo Costa just having a dominant performance over Uriah Hall, having Stipe Miocic and DC fight with DC actually being able to KO him, yeah, I think that in terms of history alone, it's really memorable, and that's where I think I'm just going to put it, edge it just into that great card category. Now, 2019, UFC 239. We had John Jones versus Thiago Santos, the split decision, which rough for Thiago Santos, man. I watched this the other day, and Thiago Santos, if he didn't bust his leg just got wrecked. I think he just did his ACL in this fight. If he didn't, honestly, he could have beat John Jones in this fight. It was that close. He really stuck it in there, but Jones had a bloody chin in this fight. So UFC 239, I mean, pretty decent, memorable main event. Then we had Amanda Nunes head kick Holly Holm, giving her a taste of her own medicine, TKOing her with the head kick. Then we had Jorge Masvidal getting the flying knee on Ben Askren. Ben Askren, obviously, at this time is going through a lot of trouble, so respects go out to him, but obviously very memorable from the side of Masvidal. We had Jan Blachowicz absolutely destroy Luke Rockhold, moving up to light heavyweight. And then we also had Chiesa absolutely dominate Sanchez as well. We also had Marlon Vera down the card in the prelims, getting a rear naked choke finish. And we also had Song Yadong as well on the, I believe it was the early prelims, getting a KO finish too. So a lot of memorable names in this fight card, and good finishes as well. 6 out of 12 finishes, but memorable finishes in that. A lot of good names on this card. And I also have a friend who I work with who went to this card. She was there, had very good seats, and she said that it was just one of, honestly, the most amazing things she's ever been to. So yeah, I know I could honestly, watching this on TV as well, yeah, it was a bloody good card, to be honest. It was very memorable overall, and that's even with it being said that we were supposed to have John Jones versus Stipe at one point for this card. We were supposed to have Ngannou on this card versus Junior Dos Santos. So we literally could have got John Jones and Ngannou on the same card. And then we also were supposed to have O'Malley fight Marlon Vera on this card as well, but he had the drug test violation at this point. So this card could have been absolutely cracked as an international fight week, but I think it salvaged itself very, very well. I think to the point, take my money. I think it honestly was a very good card. Not as good as 189, but definitely up there. Now, 2020, very big analysis here. It got cancelled. Obviously, we had COVID. We did not get a 2020 pay-per-view event. So we're moving to 2021, which is UFC 266, which still had impacts from COVID because it got pushed to September because of COVID at that time period. It kind of resparked again. So it got pushed back a little bit. So this here, we had Volkanovski versus Ortega, which was an insane fight. Almost 350 strikes between them, 3 submission attempts from Brian Ortega, blood everywhere. I mean, just a fantastic main event. We also had Valentina Shevchenko, TKO Lauren Murphy, just absolutely pieced the shit out of her. We had Robbie Lawler, technically KO, TKO, Nick Diaz, I mean, great name on the card, regardless of how Nick Diaz looked. It really just makes it more memorable anyway. I mean, Diaz did give up in that fight, but still memorable regardless. And then we also had other KOs like Andrade, KO, and Calvillo. We had Merab Dvalishvili KOing Marlon Moraes. And that was a great fight because he faced some real adversity. It really showed us Merab's recovery for the first real time. And Merab from there, I mean, he's just literally one of the goats of the sport at this point. So yeah, definitely memorable within there. We had Jalen Turner submit Uros Medic with a rear naked choke. And we had Matt Semmelsberger, Semi the Jedi, back when he was actually decent, 15-second KO straight down the pipe on Martin Sano. So there were a lot of good finishes on this card. The pay-per-view points aren't available. I don't know what they were, how many buys they got, but 8 out of 13 finishes, and it only lost Blachowicz versus Glover Teixeira for that title fight, and we know what happened there afterwards. So honestly, 8 out of 13, pretty damn good. Honestly, I think it was a very good card, great main event. We had finishes pretty much almost all throughout, and it was an extended card too, a longer card. So I do think that this is going to have to go at the top of great card. It's edging on Take My Money, very close to that Jones versus Santos. But yeah, I'm going to put it as a great card, one of the best great cards. Now, 2022, we have UFC 276. We're really getting into this era now because we had Adesanya defending his title against Jared Cannonier, which was the last real middleweight title defense he actually had. We had Volkanovski absolutely fucking mincing Max Holloway, 50-45 to him. Well, honestly, the best that Volkanovski has ever looked. It looked insane. We had Alex Pereira KO Sean Strickland. We had Brian Barberena standing TKO Robbie Lawler. We did have the O'Malley and Munoz no contest. We'll skip over that one because, I mean, we had Jalen Turner in the feature prelim get the most disgusting mounted guillotine submission on Brad Riddell, one of my favorite submissions of all time. And then we had Jim Miller, jump the gilly, Dustin Poirier would be proud, on Donald Cerrone in their second fight. Then we had good old Looney Tunes himself, fucking Dricus du Plessis, taking Tavares down on top of himself and still managing to fucking win that fight. Guy is just nuts. But we had all these names on this card, very, very good names on this card. And I will say it's definitely up there. But what pins it down from Take My Money? I mean, it was pretty poor on the pay-per-view buys. We could have had a more exciting main event, to be honest. Love Izzy, but I think it was more so on Cannonier's side. He was very tentative, and Izzy being a counter-striker, it's like the Yoel Romero fight. He's not risking anything, so not a lot was really happening. So 400k pay-per-view buys, very poor for the time period, honestly, was not very successful on the numbers. 5 out of 12 finishes, bit under that 50% rate. I mean, a lot of bangers on this card, which definitely puts it up, and it's going to be here for me. But yeah, it's just, I think there were just a couple of things in there, like the main event and some of the other fights that were decisions that just really weren't memorable at all, to be honest. So it's going in great card. Now, 2023 UFC 290. Oh my goodness, this card. I know a couple people on my channel from watching the best pay-per-views of all time video. They definitely highlight this one. And UFC 290, Volk KOing Yair Rodriguez, absolutely brutalizing him after losing to Islam Makhachev in the fight of the year. And then in the co-main event, we had a very arguable fight of the year itself in Pantoja versus Brandon Moreno, where Pantoja won the title. Then we had Dricus du Plessis KOing Robert Whittaker as an underdog. And then we had Dan Hooker versus Jalen Turner, both of them going to bloody war. We had Bo Nickel KOing Val Woodburn with a really funny, memorable KO. I mean, main card was pretty much perfect. Honestly, I just don't really see much you can argue against it. And to put on top of that, we had Robbie Lawler's retirement finish against Nico Price, getting the beautiful KO in the clinch. He retired, made it even more memorable. We even had great women's fights. We had Denise Gomes putting Yaragui into the bloody shadow realm. I mean, KO'd her extremely badly, and Yaragui was definitely an up-and-comer at that point. Yeah, just completely destroyed her chin. We had Petrino submit Marcin Prachnio. We had Cameron Simon KO Terrence Mitchell. Oh, we had Aguilar KO Shannon Ross. I mean, I'm an Aussie, but Shannon Ross just died in that finish. Extremely vicious finish. Doubled the UFC 276 pay-per-view buys with over 800k pay-per-view buys. 9 out of 13 finishes. I mean, this is all with it losing Figueiredo and Manel Kape, as Figgy was not medically cleared for the fight, and lost Sean Brady versus JDM because Sean Brady got an infection. But losing those fights and having this card be this good, I'm sorry, this is just take my money every day of the week. Pay double for the bloody pay-per-view at that point. UFC do not get any ideas. But still, honestly, an amazing, amazing event. I have nothing to knock on UFC 290. Absolutely great International Fight Week. Now, 2024, the most recent International Fight Week that we have had, unless you're watching this video after the fact, which was UFC 303, which we had Pereira in the rematch KOing Yuri. Not as much hype on it overall because it was a rematch and how good Pereira looked in the first fight, and he looked even better in this one. Just absolutely destroyed Prochazka in that. The co-main event was great because we had Diego Lopez and Dan Ige being absolute studs, coming through on like 2 to 4 hours notice at a 165-pound catch weight and fighting each other there to a decision, which was still entertaining. Then we had Ian Gary versus MVP, which I really did like that fight. Was super close. But then we had Bueno Silva versus Macy Chiasson on the main card, and Roman Dolidze versus bloody Anthony Smith, which, yeah, they just pegged down the main card for me. And then I'll say on the the feature prelim, Joe Pyfer absolutely KOing Marc-Andre Barrios stiff. Looked fantastic there. We had Andre Feely and Cub Swanson put on a really fun fight. We had Gene Silva KOing Charles Jourdain. First ever to KO Charles Jourdain. Gene Silva, as we know, an absolute beast. Then we had Peyton Talbot KO Giannis Gamori in 19 seconds, really putting Talbot on the map. So there were a lot of good fights, and especially more so actually down the card. And the pay-per-view, it's unknown. They haven't disclosed it, but I'm pretty positive it did closer to the million range, to be honest, because originally it did have Conor McGregor going against Michael Chandler for it, which would have been a lot better. And unfortunately, it did have the co-main event switch like 30 fucking times with Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree, Carlos Olberg, all of them just switching. And then we got to the point, it was Anthony Smith versus bloody Roman Dolidze. So that's what we really got. Got less than half the finish rate, 5 out of 13 finishes. So overall, not the best for me. I still think it was a good card, but I'm going to put it in a great card at the bottom of that great card, to be honest. I did like UFC 226 better than UFC 303, to be honest. Now, UFC 317, my predictions. Is this going to be a good card, or is this going to be a pile of dog shit? Well, we have got Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira for the vacant lightweight title, thanks to Islam Makhachev. So, off the bat, fantastic fight. One of the best fights we could have this year for a title fight. We have Pantoja versus Kai Kara France, which Pantoja, the last time he was in a co-main event, which did very well on an International Fight Week, was UFC 290. So definitely another positive there. Then we've got Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. Absolute certified banger of a fight that's going to be there. And now Dana White has confirmed that pretty much whoever wins out of those two is going to get a title shot. So best believe they're going to absolutely bring it. We've got Dariush versus Renato Moicano, Money Moicano. Very close fight, stylistically, just very, very fascinating. Going to be a bit of a chess match. Love Moicano's persona, and Dariush is very underrated, to be honest. Even though he's on a couple of finish losses, you can never count him out. And then, oh my goodness, we have got Peyton Talbot versus Lima. I believe it's Andre Lima. He is very, very good. I've got him beating Talbot. I think Andre Lima is honestly one of, if not the most underrated prospect in those lower weight classes, or even the whole entire UFC that's not ranked at the moment. He is a freak of nature. Definitely keep your eyes out for him, unless the card's already done. But anyway, I think the whole main card bangs, and I think, honestly, there are parts of it that aren't great because there are a couple unknowns on the card, which is like Jackson McVeigh. I mean, we have Christopher Hewitt, which I think their fight's cancelled now. And then we have Alvin Hines. These guys are just not known at all, to be honest. So it's a bit weird for an International Fight Week that's supposed to be so heavy. You'd think you'd just put them on a fight night or something. But I will say we do have some heaters on the prelims because we got Vyacheslav Borshev versus Terrence McKinney. One of them's going to die. And then we got Haider Emil versus Jose Delgado. He is looking really good. Both of them, I think that's going to be a very high output fight. Both of them very durable as well. I'm very keen to see that one. And honestly, I think that fight could be fight of the night, or could be the co-main, or could be Royval's fight. There's a lot of great fights here, to be honest, and realistically, with how stacked it is at the moment, could be just recency bias, but I think it's going to be the second best International Fight Week pay-per-view that we have seen. It's mirroring a lot of the aspects of UFC 290, but yeah, I think I'm being too optimistic. It's going to beat UFC 290, to be honest. 290 was just absolutely ridiculous, and I think that there's going to be 7 out of 12 finishes on this card, possibly like 7 out of 11, actually. It depends if we got that recent fight cut, but more than half. I think it's going to do great on pay-per-views. We've got some bangers on the card. So yeah, I'm going to put it as the second best International Fight Week pay-per-view that we can get. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this tier list video, and please comment down below what you think is the best International Fight Week pay-per-view, and I'd really like to hear your comments on what you would change in this list for you personally. And please like, comment, subscribe. It goes a long way for the channel. And if you want to see more MMA-based content, there's just a video here on the screen for you, and I will catch you in the next one.